So first off, if you're just here for the equation, I'll annotate it up there, and I'll also put it in the description down below, along with a link to where it was originally posted. But so this project actually came out of just a sort of an offhanded comment. Somebody had come up with an equation that calculated, or estimated, I should say, rate of fire, but it wasn't very accurate for quite a few people for a variety of reasons. And so I had my own way. I'd always estimated rate of fire from just a list of parts, and so I thought, well, why don't I try and put that together into an equation? And the way I'd always done it before was I'd simply said, okay, so a standard setup running stock ratio gears, which are 18.72 to 1, 16 TPA turns per armature motor with neodymium magnets on an 11.1 volt battery will output about 30 rounds per second. And so I'd always just sort of multiplied or divided by that. So if I wanted, for example, to find out what it would perform, what a setup like that, but on a 7.4 volt battery would perform like, just divide it by 11.1 and multiply, divide 30 by 11.1 and multiply it by 7.4, and I'd do that. So I thought, well, okay, why don't I put that into an equation of some sort for this thread? And you can sort of see, this is my scribbles. It took me half a page and maybe a few minutes, if that, to sort of put it together. And I mean, the process was basically figuring out whether, you know, your factor, whether or not something is a multiplier or a divisor, and it's relatively easy to derive from that, or just figure out yourself. And so I created all these constants, but it pretty quickly became clear to me that you're multiplying all these different things together anyway. So your constant, rather than having, you can see here I had 3 constants, you can combine all your constants into one, which credit to an Acro 12, he called it the Hunter Seeker 5 or HS5 constant, which I rather like. And yeah, okay, it uses more sig figs than it needs to, but it's 809.5135. And so what is that? Well, so, and how did I find it? So basically, you figure out, I mean, again, whether a factor is a multiplier or divisor, basically whether it goes on the top or the bottom of the equation, and have your voltage on top, your ratio, your turns per armature on the bottom, and your rate of fire is the output. And so I just went in here and plugged in, I apologize for the breeze, I went in here and plugged in my standard setup, 11.1 volt battery, 16 turns per armature motor, 18.72 ratio gears equals 30 rounds per second, solved for that, and that's what gave me X, the constant, the HS5 constant, if you will. And so that's how I arrived at this conclusion of that. And so that's sort of a rough measure. I was actually surprised by the response, because I'd always used it just as an approximation, and so I sent it to a bunch of people, and they sent it to a bunch more people, and pretty soon people were like, oh my god, this works. And I thought, well, that's funny, this is just some pokey little thing I've been doing for a couple of years, and who'd have guessed that you could throw it into an equation that would actually surprise people and how effective it was. I guess I'd always just assumed other people were doing something similar to that. But anyway, so what does this depend on? Well, so first it depends on neodymium magnets in the motor, and that's just part because regular ferrous motors, nice, a helicopter, perfect. Anyway, so normal ferrous magnet motors, they're not necessarily consistent in their magnetism, but the bigger problem is that their RPMs will vary very greatly depending on load, so you'd need some sort of spring factor to be added in there, spring, but then of course you'd have spring and drag, so how efficient your setup was and how well your gears mesh, you really wouldn't be able to forecast it as accurately. So that's one of the conditions. You have to have a neodymium magnet motor because they produce sufficient torque at whatever their running RPMs are. They're not as easily affected by load, at least in my experience. Whereas if you take 16 turns per armature is pretty standard for a torque neodymium magnet motor, but that produces a speed ferrous magnet motor. And just again, as an easy example, a G&P M120 is also 16 turns per armature, and you run that thing on an M90 and it'll blow your socks off, and you run the thing on an 140, and it'll be arthritically crawling along. So so that's one thing. The other is unlimited amperage, and that's just because this equation can't, I doubt any can accurately predict what a lame battery will do. So if a battery is your limiting factor, you're not going to get good results, because you just can't predict, okay, so a battery is rated, lithium polymer batteries, we have our coulomb and our milliamp hour ratings, right? So we can, in theory, predict what our limited continuous amp output is, but the thing is, these lithium batteries are known for sourcing immense current on startup, so they can really source a lot, and we're not really using continuous power either. We're running at an interval, so we can always sort of source a current spike. And also, your milliamp hour ratings and your coulomb ratings are the advertising points of these batteries, and so they're often, shall we say, embellished. So that's why you can't reasonably factor in a lame battery. Also, battery damage is cumulative, right? And so if your battery has died over time, how would you rate it? So that's part of the reason why I say effectively unlimited amperage from the battery, meaning your battery is not your limiting factor. So on performance guns, if you think you're going to run it on a buffer tube LiPo, basically you're screwed. And the final is sort of implicit by the other two, no spring force degradation, right? As you increase your spring rate, you will up your battery's power along with it, such that your motor will not really lose significant RPMs in use. And so this holds relatively true. So that's sort of how it all goes together. And I mean, the ultimate equation is rate of fire equals X, the constant, times battery voltage divided by turns per armature times gear ratio, and that's it. Relatively simple. So I hope that explains everything. I know somebody's going to complain that it's too long, but like I said in the beginning, you shouldn't have watched this if you just wanted the equation. And again, everything relevant is down in the description. Hope this helps.